Today, we're going back to an older style of video. I used to do a lot of clowning around on different websites, including CBR, Kotaku, and others. And you know what? There are a few good people who work at every one of these websites, okay? Just kind of like how, we can all collectively look at the government and think they just kind of stink. But every once in a while, there's someone you're like, I vibe with that person. So I will say that there's no hatred towards anyone who actually made this list, but I might have stumbled across one of the worst Assassin's Creed game rankings of all time. I don't know why this is a big thing right now, but everybody is ranking every Assassin's Creed game, I think, to get into the search engine optimization and the keywords, with Mirage being a huge talking point right now. So, Kotaku, in their infinite wisdom, because I think Kotaku's the easiest to clown on, decided to make their own ranking of the Assassin's Creed games, and this was a group effort by a lot of different people. So we're going to take a look at it today, because they have ranked them starting from worst to best, and I do want to take a little bit of, talk a little bit, I guess, about their reasoning as well for each one. So it's going to be a very casual video today. We're just going to kind of roll through. Going to be some gameplay, going to be some articles shown, and just a good old discussion. Now, in this video, I'm going to be playing some footage of Assassin's Creed games. Probably most of them will line up with the one we're talking about, but any I don't have footage of, I know that what I'm showing is not that game. I'm just playing Assassin's Creed. So if you see Assassin's Creed 2, but we're talking about Origins or something, I know it's Assassin's Creed 2. If you do enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I appreciate you very much, but let's hop right into it. This is the true crime. They put your girl Xiao Jun at the worst. They put Assassin's Creed Chronicles as the worst game in the series, which I actually completely disagree with. This game is very, very different, and some of them out of this collection are not as good as others. Like, for example, I like Assassin's Creed Russia. I think it had potential to be a lot better than it was. The crown jewel standing out of this is pretty much Assassin's Creed China. It is the Xiao Jun story. I mean, she's pretty beloved. She went on to even get her own manga. I've been advocating for her to get a 3D game forever. I don't know why they won't do it, especially because Ubisoft has pushed for more diversity and inclusion, but they ignore their Chinese female protagonist. I don't get why. They even wrote a manga for her, but they won't give her a 3D game. Regardless, this is not the worst game in the series, in my opinion, but let's take a look at their reasoning. They pretty much talked about how this game is a complete misfire, which was 3 smaller games collected together instead of one bigger game. They did talk about how the games are gorgeous, but that they're not fun to play and are sloppy. And I actually completely disagree with this. Jill and I have been playing through Assassin's Creed titles again together, and I'm actually looking forward to getting to some of the Chronicles ones for Let's Playing, because when we played through Assassin's Creed Chronicles China together, it was super fun. I really thought that the stealth was well done in this game, especially for a 2.5D, or I should just say 2D, basically, side-scrolling game. I'm surprised at how well they were able to do the stealth. I know it's not impossible, but it's very easy to mess up, and I thought it was done very, very well. I also thought that this game really tied in well to the mythos of Assassin's Creed, especially with including Ezio in a more mentor role, and sort of showing what happened to the Chinese Brotherhood of Assassins at this time. And while this isn't a typical Assassin's Creed 3D game, nor is it really a typical RPG-style game for Assassin's Creed, I thought at the very least China really, really carried this collection of games. And overall, it's just a very artistic entry into the series that, if nothing else, should get a ton of props for being unique. For me, India was the least interesting out of this, and, that's just for me, not because of the country, but because of the gameplay. I think that it didn't really add or have too much going on that wasn't happening in China or Russia. And Russia, I thought, could have been better than it was, but was still really good. China really carries this game, I guess, though, and I didn't really think it was the worst at all. But let's move on from it to look at their next entry, which is one that's just an actual crime, the original Assassin's Creed. I don't really understand how you think this could be one of the worst of the franchise, because they do go on to talk about how the modern day narrative is more connected and interesting than in later games. The mystery of Abstergo and the Templars was genuinely intriguing. I completely agree with that. 100%. We actually recently made a video about Assassin's Creed 1, and we talked about how good that game is and how well it holds up, even despite the talk of needing a remake and all that stuff. I think it's just a fantastic game overall. It's implemented very, very well. The stealth is done very well. Sure, are there things I would change in hindsight or things I like better on later on in the series? Yes. But this also did have one of the most interesting settings, actually, in the franchise as well. I do agree that the controls can be stiff, but I don't think the combat is boring. I just think it's difficult. I'm not very good at it, okay? I will go on and admit that completely. Like, I know a lot of times when I talk about the combat from Assassin's Creed 1, people talk about, well, actually, there's combos and there's this and that. You're right, there is. If you can time the strikes very well and you know what you're doing, there is combos and there is stuff like that. I do agree that it's a little stiff. I don't agree that it's boring. And then they say one of the worst things I've ever seen to me, which is that they said Altair feels underdeveloped as a character. Altair probably has one of the best character journey stories out of anyone in Assassin's Creed ever. He probably has one of the most complete character stories. That's not even including things like Revelations. I'm just talking AC1. This guy starts out as the most full of himself prick who cannot be bothered to listen to any wisdom, any advice outside of himself. He just thinks with his sword, and that's it. That's all he is. He's a killer. And he doesn't think about why he does it. He doesn't care why he does it. He just does it. And also, he's very prideful about it. Like, he's proud of being a killer. He doesn't do it because he has to. He basically does it to prove something. Then over the course of the game, he's kind of confronted with the fact that there's a world much bigger than him and events happening that are much more complex than he could have ever imagined. And that slowly kind of breaks him down and makes him realize how much of a fool he's been. I don't understand in what way that's underbaked or underdeveloped. I mean, this has to be one of the best development stories for an assassin in the entire franchise. That take to me comes off as like people who didn't understand the story of the game. So next up is Assassin's Creed Unity. And I will say that for me, elements of this game are towards the bottom of the list and other elements of the game are towards the top of the list. I'm not exactly sure how I would rank these games myself completely. I will admit that right now. But I wouldn't rank them the way that they have so far. If it was 2014 right now, and you made this list, ignoring the fact some of this came out after 2014, just bear with me, I would agree with you that Unity was one of the worst. And here's why. The game launched really broken. Absolutely a mess, okay? And the disc version of this game, if you don't have any patches, is just sad. Because in 30 years, 40 years, I don't know how this game will be preserved, but let's say somebody pops in a PS4 copy of this game, no patches, nothing. That game is an absolute mess. If we are actually grading this game, though, based off of how it is today, there's not actually that much wrong with it, and I disagree with a lot of their criticisms. They said that when it came out, it was visually stunning. I completely agree, but that other things didn't work. They said it seems most folks remember Unity as the broken Assassin's Creed because it was eventually patched and improved, which I completely agree. But I think my problem with their criticism for it is they say that when it was patched and improved, it's not as fun as other games, and that I don't agree with. I mean, I also don't agree with the idea that Unity is technically... Well, how would I say this? Unity has better gameplay in some ways than AC1, right? So I understand why they'd put it above it in that regard. But I think Altair has a much deeper character story than Arno does, even though I also really like Arno's character story as well. And I like the uniqueness of it with falling in love with a Templar, blah, blah, blah. I like all of that, okay? But what they do is they kind of boil it all down to make it sound really stupid. They said the story was dull, which I don't agree with at all. I think the whole Templar assassin romance, almost Romeo and Juliet style, along with a murder mystery of who actually killed who, I thought that was done pretty well. They said the main character was boring. I don't actually think Arno is boring. I just think he borrows a lot of character traits from Ezio and Edward, but he's not the same guy. And they said the Paris setting was forgettable. What's weird to me, though, is that I thought the Paris setting was one of the most interesting parts of this game, and honestly, one of the most interesting settings in the entire franchise. I mean, Paris feels very alive. There's so much to do. It doesn't really feel tacked on or boring to me. And Dead Kings ended up being free and adding in even more content for players to explore and engage with. So I guess I'm just kind of confused how it was boring Also, this game had really good combat, at least when it's running well, when the game is actually patched. And the free running is one of the best in the series. Even though I think it has like really streamlined, awesome free running and climbing, it did go on to push the series in a direction where it would become more and more automatic. That's a problem that I have with this game, that I guess a criticism I have. But putting it this low on the list is a bit weird. I will say that as much as I like the RPGs, I'm really shocked they're not down here. Like, that's something I'm shocked about for me, because I think those games are really fun and they're really cool, but I see them more as like an offshoot of Assassin's Creed. To me, they're just as much a part of Assassin's Creed as any other game. I know a lot of people will argue about that, but with how much they're dogged on and how much people hate on them, and also how much they are more of like a supplemental Isu story, right? And about the first civilization and how the Hidden Ones, and all these things came to be. I'm surprised that they're not down here just because they were not what people think of when they think of typical Assassin's Creed. So we move on to 12 and they have Assassin's Creed Liberation, which Liberation is really fun. I think it's cool. I do think that giving it credit for just being the first game to let you play as a woman is a little weird when you don't give some of that same credit to like Xiao Jun from Chronicles, because that's a fantastic game, I think. And they did mention that this game played like Assassin's Creed 3, which I love Assassin's Creed 3. Now, I know that the Assassin's Creed games have a lot of political intrigue and politics in them, but I do think it's a little amusing because it's Kotaku we're talking about, right? Where like for Kotaku, everything is innately super political. Like that's the core ethos of it. That they had to make this about passing, which if you don't know what passing is so there's a lot of different ways to look at it. When it comes to trans communities and like people of different gender orientations and stuff like that, I'm going to use myself as an example because it's like the least offensive or mean example I can think of. If I wanted to present as a woman, if I passed or not, which is kind of demeaning when other people say it, but it's also a officially used word, it would pretty much mean this, like, do I look like a woman, right? So like if I was trans and I wanted to present myself as female and I wanted people to see me as female, passing is the idea of like, do people think that I'm female without questioning if I was born female or not biologically, right? This also does go on into racial theory and stuff as well. So they kind of had to bring that up with this entry, which is very odd to me because they combined it with the idea of using different outfits to blend into different social classes, which I do think was really cool for social stealth. I agree with that. But they had to link to passing, which is very odd. And they said not something many, if any, games deal with or include. So, okay, I agree with that to an extent. It's just a little odd to bring up. And they don't really talk about the game at all. Like, they just don't talk about it at all. They just write a whole paragraph about passing. And that's it, for the most part. I mean, all they said was the game was limited in scope, but impressive, but the Vita limited it, and also it's cool that you got to pass as different people. There's really no reasoning as to why this is at spot 12, but I guess we can move on to Assassin's Creed Revelations, because, I don't know, I think this kind of is often the forgotten Assassin's Creed game. One of my first big videos was making a review of this game. This is probably, off the top of my head, if not my favorite Assassin's Creed game, it's one of my favorite. And I'm already going to disagree with them. I actually think this is much better than Brotherhood as a game, okay? I think there's certain things you can say are better about Brotherhood. I think this game is the best of the Ezio trilogy. I think nostalgia often carries AC2 for a lot of people to the top, or Brotherhood. But I think that if you're actually looking at the game as far as how it plays, character development, and everything like that, I personally think Revelations is the best. But they do go on to talk about how this was built on the back of Assassin's Creed 2, and they are right about that. But they said that because it used the same tech, it felt old and creaky. And to that I actually disagree with. These games only came out over a handful of years, and honestly, Assassin's Creed 2 itself still handles things like climbing better than some games do today. So I don't really find it old or creaky at all. I also don't find it old or creaky to go back to either. Nate and I played through Assassin's Creed 2 actually recently on our Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays, and now we're in the process of playing through Brotherhood. So if you're interested in either of that, The link to that channel is in the description down below. They talked about how it was hard to get excited about another sequel to AC2, which is weird because that's the opposite of what I remember happening. Now, I'm old enough to have been young when this game, was coming out, and honestly, the PlayStation 2 was my first console, so by the time of the Xbox 360, your boy was well versed in the gaming franchise of Assassin's Creed, obviously because, I bought the Assassin's Creed franchise late. So by the time I started playing Assassin's Creed, Brotherhood was already out. So with this game, they kind of go on to say that it contained one of the worst, dumbest minigames in Assassin's Creed history, which was tower defense. I do agree that they came out of nowhere, like they did feel out of place, but I didn't really think they were poorly made. I actually thought they were kind of fun and interesting. And I did think it was good when Assassin's Creed used to try these old things, or when old Assassin's Creed used to try new things, I should say. Sorry, it's kind of hard because I'm reading what they're saying. I'm also trying not to just verbatim read everything that every article says, because I feel like that's unfair to the writers of the article. That's why I try and link to these things, at least when they're not too stupid. But with this, they don't really talk about this game at all. They only talk about how it was hard to get excited for another Ezio game, which is the opposite of how everyone else felt, and about the mini-game of tower defense, and that's it. They didn't really talk at all about how the multiplayer kind of kept on enhancing itself. Personally, I like the multiplayer better from Brotherhood, I think, but I thought that this one still was good. But all they really talk about is how Ezio was getting boring because his games were old at this point, and about how tower defense was bad. I guess I'm wondering, where are the mentions of things like how this franchise handled the idea of an aging hero, or how it also handled the idea of this culture? Because Ezio actually was completely a fish out of water here. He wasn't the big, head Italian assassin in an area that was either Italy or Italy adjacent, right? That wasn't where he was anymore in his life. He was a much older, kind of aching man who was nearing the end of the time he could be an assassin, even though he was, this sort of grand master. He also was feeling the effects of age, and he was finally sort of coming to terms with that in a lot of ways. This video is getting a little long, so I wanted to skip ahead. If you want to read through their entire ranking, I have put the link to it in the description down below. At number 5 is AC2. Now, I want to move past that really quick. We all know how we feel about AC2. Most people like it. But what's very odd to me is that Assassin's Creed Odyssey is somehow above it. I don't have the hate boner for Assassin's Creed Odyssey that a lot of the fandom seems to have, of oh, it's about the Isu, and it's an RPG, and it's not Assassin's Creed enough, and this and that. I don't really have that. I mean, for me, they've been doing pretty much spin-off titles in a way since AC4. They stopped numbering these. They've kind of just been doing whatever they want. That doesn't mean that it's okay for them to have problems, but for me, Odyssey, for example, I don't think something like Assassin's Creed, Syndicate ties super into the overall narrative that much more than Assassin's Creed Odyssey. They are both adventures taking place in the Assassin's Creed world. They add things to it. My point that I'm getting at is it's not like there was a really strong through-thread modern-day story after Assassin's Creed 4. They kind of brought it back a little bit with Origins and Odyssey and Valhalla. There was stuff going on that I found interesting, but what I'm saying is it wasn't like the good old days of Desmond Miles, where the real world narrative was really going somewhere and there was very clearly some kind of plan for it. After a while that kind of fell through, and it was mainly just about the assassins and the world that they lived in and how things came to be in that world and events that took place. I think Odyssey fills that role just fine, just like other games do, set in the universe, even in the classic style, like Syndicate or Rogue or Unity or, Assassin's Creed 4. I think a lot of those games do fill that same role, but what's weird to me is that Odyssey has always been a very divisive title. It's not really even about the assassins very much in it. It's very, very much about the world around the assassins. This really only ties into the assassins in the way of Cassandra. and I don't want to go into it too much more than that. But if you've played the game, you know what I mean, and if you haven't played it, I do recommend checking it out. I still like these RPG Assassin's Creed games. Again, I don't have like the hatred for them that people do. I love the customization. I think the gameplay is fun. I like level-based games. But it was very, very different for Assassin's Creed to go this direction with Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, so it's odd to see Odyssey so high up on the list and eclipsing something like Assassin's Creed 2. But when we move on, it gets a little more interesting because Valhalla is above Odyssey as well. And Valhalla does tie more into the Assassins. It gets more into the ideas of, I guess I would say, reincarnation. And of course, it is going to tie as well into Mirage a little bit, or should I say Mirage is going to tie into it with Basim and everything going on with him actually being an assassin. But again, this is a game where you do not play really as an assassin. You play more as like an assassin ally. You're assassin adjacent. But again, it's not like I don't like the RPG games. I know a lot of people in my comments don't. And so I want to clarify that in terms of like, I don't really feel that way. You guys are justified to feel that way if you want to. I don't. I enjoy these games. But for me, I wouldn't be putting things like Valhalla or Odyssey above Assassin's Creed 2 or Revelations or Brotherhood or 4. They're just not that character driven for me compared to some of those other games. These games were a lot more about freedom, which I thought was done very well, customization and exploration and stuff like that. And I like the lore that they provide, but I wouldn't put them at the top. For me, the RPGs are kind of like the middle games. Like, they're fun. I like them a lot. I like them more than a lot of people. And in fact, I love pretty much every Assassin's Creed game, actually. But I wouldn't put them up above the cream of the crop, as good old Macho Man Randy Savage would say. I will say they made a good choice with number 2 with Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. I don't feel like I need to do a lot of justification about it. They did point out that they took some of the better things in AC3, like the ship command, and integrated it into the overall experience of Assassin's Creed 4. This game, though, does have problems as well. I think it's an amazing game. However, they should have just dropped the modern day from it, and I say that with frustration. I liked the modern day story. I liked when it was going somewhere and when it tied into things. And honestly, even though they can't decide if they want it to be canon or not, when they bring in things like a modern day assassin into Watch Dogs Legion, or they start referencing Aiden Pierce in behind the scenes pictures, with Assassin's Creed, I believe Odyssey, or was it Origins? Doesn't matter, because they'll argue it wasn't canon anyway, with an actual Assassin's Creed tie-in mission in Watch Dogs. When they start getting into that kind of stuff, I find that interesting still. I find the modern day interesting. However, in Assassin's Creed 4, the modern day is pretty much just walking around Abstergo offices, and it kind of interrupts the flow of gameplay and makes you not want to do it that much. I think it's interesting to look around, but that's about it. So 4 is a really great game. I do think it's one of the best. It's not without its faults, because they didn't know where to take the modern day of the franchise, and instead of just not doing it like Mirage, because they didn't have anything to do with it, they decided to still do it and push it into the game, which I think was a mistake. But moving on to their number 1, this is an interesting take. I know this is Nate's favorite Assassin's Creed game, at least as of right now, and that's Assassin's Creed Origins. This game is, I think, the one that even people who don't really like the RPG style mostly enjoyed. I don't hear many complaints about Origins. And even though it is a open world like RPG, there are a lot of things that tie into the original games, and it felt like an evolution of them in a way. It's just that following this, they started to step further away from the original Assassin's Creed formula towards something different. But with Valhalla and with Odyssey, they basically moved more and more away from what Origins was, and more away, by proxy, from what the original Assassin's Creed franchise was. I don't really necessarily think Origins being at the top is some terrible take or like a horrific thing, but I think overall the list is just pretty bad because yes, the top 2 picks are very good, but most of the rest of them just don't make any sense. The reasoning is fairly flimsy, and there's not a lot backing up what they're saying or why they put them there. A few of them are based off of things like identity. Like, for example, Freedom Cry, a lot of their justification was just who you're playing as, not actually what the game is itself and, the gameplay of it. And same with Assassin's Creed Liberation. I think it's odd that some games get a pass here for who you play as, others don't, and I find it odd that they want to spend more time talking about passing in something like Liberation than the gameplay mechanics and the merits of the game itself. But again, that's just kind of what Kotaku does. Now, overall, is it like an absolute abortion of truth, like they've ruined this franchise? No. But it's certainly not a take I agree with, and I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about today. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. For anyone who is interested, I started a new channel, King of Creepy, which is a horror narration channel, which I hope you'll check out. The link is in the description down below. And if you're a fan of Assassin's Creed, we've been playing through Assassin's Creed Brotherhood over on our Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays. The link is in the description down below. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.